Out of the ash I rise with my red hair, and I eat men like air. Welcome, guys, to our 5 Top Tips mini episode of Loud Poets Happy Hour. I am Dr. Katie Ailes. I am your host for Happy Hour, which is our new series in which we take on writing challenges, complete them ourselves, and guide you guys how to complete them with us. Our current challenge is to write poetry voiced by monsters. Guys, I have absolutely loved this challenge. I hope that you are writing along with this one because it is so much fun, and I cannot wait to see what the rest of the team does with it. To see the episode in which this challenge was proposed, you can click on the link up in the eye over there, and you can watch all of our Happy Hour episodes through the playlist linked below. Guys, if you are enjoying this series or anything else that we put out on the channel, please do give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell icon so that you don't miss any of our other poetic goodness. In today's episode, I'm going to give you guys examples, ideas, and advice on writing from the perspective of monsters. And as always, everything that I mention will be linked in the description below. So let's get to it, and let's start here. So first off, what kind of monsters are we talking about here? As always, I would encourage you guys to think really broadly about what sort of different perspectives you could write from in this challenge. Are you going to write from the perspective of a literal monster like a werewolf, a vampire, a chupacabra? Are you going to write as a human with monstrous tendencies like a serial killer or a cannibal? Or are you going to embody a monstrous concept like capitalism? I could spend this entire episode trying to parse out what we consider to be monstrous. That is a huge, huge question. But I think one of the easiest ways to consider it is to think about what the difference is between a creature and a monster. For example, we consider unicorns to be magical creatures, but not monsters, whereas we consider vampires to also be magical creatures, but we also consider them to be monstrous. The distinction here is that we consider to be monstrous creatures which break some sort of human societal taboos or norms, right? So a vampire breaks those norms by killing and sucking blood and transforming humans into fellow vampires, whereas a unicorn is just sort of nice. So when you're writing from the perspective of a monster for this challenge, I want you to think about what taboos your monster breaks. How exactly are they monstrous? And for some help on picking your monster, I know that we mention mythology a lot in Happy Hour, and that's because it can be a fantastic source of different ideas and different stories from around the globe. And obviously, mythology is not the only place to come up with monsters, but it can be a fantastic starting point for finding creatures from global mythologies that might inspire you. So below, I have linked to 2 of my absolute favorite podcasts, which might provide you with some inspiration for this challenge. The first one is called Myths and Legends, and it retells myths and legends from global cultures. And they have a Creature of the Week segment, which is great. A fantastic way for finding the monstrous. The second podcast is called Bedtime Stories for the End of the World. It is an absolutely brilliant UK poetry project which commissions poets to write new material retelling their favorite myths, and a lot of them do focus on monsters. So please do check out both of those podcasts as potential starting points for your monster hunt. And as you're selecting your monster, as you're selecting the perspective from which to write for this challenge, keep in mind that there are so many different examples of the monstrous through different cultures, different good and bad perspectives, right? And really keep an open mind as to how to approach this challenge. And now for a brilliant example of a poem voiced by a human monster, watch this. Brief plug here, if you guys aren't watching our flagship show, The Loudcast, you are missing out. Go check out all of the episodes through that link in the eye, or you can listen to it through your favorite podcast platforms. The Loudcast is where I found the first example that I'm going to be sharing with you guys in this Happy Hour episode, and it comes from the absolutely brilliant icon, the writer, performer, and comedian Robert Florence, the episode that we did with him. Here's Rab performing the beginning of his poem, Sawney Bean.
I will hide here in a cave with my beloved and my children. I will tear each passer-by from limb to limb. Inside the cave we'll warm ourselves by fires that we started. without the aid of you or she or him. The sky at night will be aglow with stars forever falling, and who will even know what day begins? For all of me is this sweet cave my love and all my children, the blood of careless strangers on our chins.
To watch the rest of the poem, there is a timestamped URL in the description below that will take you directly to the part of the Loudcast where Rab is reading that poem. And I've also put a link to Rab's ebook, which you can download for free, which contains the full text of Sawney Bean. So if you're unfamiliar with this myth, Sawney Bean is a truly horrifying figure in Scottish legend/history. The lines are a little bit blurry. The story goes that in the 1500s, Sawney Bean was the patriarch of a massive incestuous family that lived in a cave on the west coast of Scotland and killed and ate all passers-by, over 1,000 people, according to the legends. I love Rab Florence's poem Sawney Bean because what it does is it shows a different perspective on this figure from Scottish folklore, this really horrifying character. And it shows a more relatable side of him while not letting him off the hook for his actions. The number one rule of writing in persona, I would argue, is that you need to understand the creature or figure or concept that you're embodying. Now, this does not necessarily mean agreeing or empathizing with them. We'll get to that later. It means understanding their motivations, what they want and need and desire, even if that's as basic as, I'm hungry. Now, you might not think that the old adage, write what you know, fits this challenge unless you're a cave-dwelling cannibal, but it actually still is solid advice. In this poem, Rab does the seemingly impossible by finding shared ground with Sawney Bean through their common love of family and desire to protect them. In the Loudcast, Rab contextualizes this poem through the Me Too movement and the culture that it brought to light of sexual violence against women and violence more broadly against people, the use of power in that way. And through his deep-seated need and want to keep his wife and daughters safe from that culture. No, Rab Florence doesn't murder and eat everyone who he perceives to be a threat to the women in his life, at least as far as I'm aware. But his core motivation of keeping these women safe from a cruel, violent world is something that he shares with the version of Sawney Bean that he's created through this poem. Does this poem justify Sawney Bean's actions in the legend? No. He's still a murderer-cannibal. But at least we know why he's a murderer-cannibal, to protect the women in his life, which makes him a more well-rounded murderer-cannibal as a character. So when you're writing in persona, at any point, but here in this challenge, writing in persona as a monster, make sure that you're really getting in this character's head and understanding their motivations. And if at all possible, try to find a point on which to relate to this character. And for another, hopefully even more relatable monster, read this. If you're at all familiar with Scottish literature, you will of course be aware of the absolute titan Liz Lochhead. Her feminist, sharp, innovative plays and poetry have radically energized the Scottish literary landscape from the 60s all the way through today and continuing forward. Much of Liz Lochhead's work engages with figures from myth, history, and literature, from Euripides to Mary Queen of Scots to Molière. Here I want to focus on one short poem from her brilliant collection Dreaming Frankenstein and Other Collected Poems, 1967 to 1984. The poem What the Creature Said is the second in a sequence of 3 poems focusing on Frankenstein. I'll read the first 2 stanzas here. The blind man did not hate me. I saw him through the window, through the rippling circle my own hot breath had melted in the spiky flowers of the frost. I was exhausted. Imagine it. Midwinter, mountains, forest, dragging my bad leg over iron ground, impossible passes, pained by that flesh wound where the villager's silver bullet grazed me. Lochhead's poem is based on the events of chapter 15 of Mary Shelley's classic, legendary novel Frankenstein. In this chapter, Frankenstein's monster, injured and exhausted from his travels, knocks on the door of a blind man seeking shelter. The monster hopes that the blind man will not immediately reject him because the man cannot see his stitched-together face, which is so horrifying to all other humans. In this poem and in the original novel, what motivates Frankenstein's monster here is the desire for rest, shelter, compassion, friendship, and a respite from persecution. And of course, these are intensely human needs, which is something that both Shelley and Lochhead were emphasizing. Frankenstein's monster in pop culture is a figure of abject horror. But in Shelley's novel, and here in Lochhead's poem, he's gentle, sweet, and very intelligent. These writers humanize Frankenstein's monster by demonstrating how much he's misunderstood and indicating how human prejudice is the true monstrosity. Here's the thing with monsters. We fear what we don't understand. So consider this when you're composing your monster poem. Is your portrayal of your monster going to make people understand it better and fear it less? Or maybe understand it better and actually fear it more? Are you showing a relatable and empathetic side of a creature that everyone has unfairly judged as monstrous? Or on the other hand, are you sharing exactly how and why they're monstrous by revealing their motivations? As you write, consider how you'd like your reader to feel about your monster at the conclusion of your poem. Your writing could make a monster lovable, huggable, or make the reader want to throw your book at the wall and run away screaming. It's up to you how empathetic you want your monster to be. And for more great examples of writing subverting monstrosity, look elsewhere. One of my absolute favorite subgenres of literature is feminist writers who subvert monstrosity by voicing female monsters. Often what these writers do is they take these monsters and show how perhaps their apparent monstrosity is A, not their fault, and B, evidence of deeply ingrained sexism. One of the best examples of this, and in my opinion, a book that everyone should read, is Angela Carter's groundbreaking 1979 short story collection, The Bloody Chamber. The stories in The Bloody Chamber retell classic fairy tales, including Beauty and the Beast, Snow White, Little Red Riding Hood, Puss in Boots, and more, often from a very different perspective and sometimes with quite different endings. Carter's stories investigate gender, violence, and monstrosity in eloquent and often quite disturbing ways, prompting important questions about what we fear and why. For one great example from the book, take the story The Werewolf, which I've linked to in the description below. This story adapts the classic Little Red Riding Hood fairy tale, and it has it so that the grandmother is actually a werewolf who Little Red Riding Hood maims and then murders with the help of the villagers. Now, this story does not offer any easy morals. Is the child the protagonist here because she slays an evil demon who is posing as her grandmother? Or is the grandmother actually the victim, unable to control her phasing and killed by villagers who don't understand her and can't empathize with her? Or is it some combination of both? Carter's approach in The Bloody Chamber provides a different perspective on these monsters, and often a feminist perspective, although not necessarily always. A lot of scholars have talked about this. But it's a great example of retelling monster stories in a way that sometimes empathizes with the creatures, but often leaves that empathy ambiguous for the reader to decide how they want to perceive these stories. And Carter is definitely not alone in this tradition. There are so many fantastic examples of poets who have rewritten monster narratives with feminist twists. UK poet laureate Carol Ann Duffy has so many poems reimagining myths and monsters, and her poem Medusa is one of my absolute favorites, giving, again, perhaps not empathy to that figure, but certainly a bit more detail behind her rage. Sylvia Plath's poem Lady Lazarus, which I quoted at the top of this episode, voices perhaps not a monster, but certainly a female version of the biblical figure Lazarus who rises from the dead to have a commentary on suicide and resurrection and what we consider to be monstrous about death and the return from death. And for a very recent Scottish example, my dear pal and one of our absolute favorite poets here at Loud Poets, Sarah Grant, has a fantastic show called Spark, which is in part about witches and the witch trials in Scotland. And some parts of that show are voiced by the witches on trial. It's a fantastic commentary on, again, what we consider to be scary and to be monstrous. And I've linked to that full show, which you can watch for free via the link in the description. So as you are writing from the perspective of your monster, consider whether there are any assumptions about this monster that you might want to subvert. Why is it considered monstrous, and how have we perhaps gotten that wrong? Maybe you don't want to subvert anything. Maybe your monster is just a true monster, and that is completely fine. But play around a little bit with the possibilities here for subversion of monstrosity. But it is time to end on a slightly lighter note, and remember, the examples that I've shared in this episode are pretty intense and definitely for an adult audience, but do keep in mind that probably the majority of monster poetry out there is written for a younger demographic. Think of the Gruffalo, the BFG, and even the very hungry caterpillar who has a monstrous appetite. Thank you, Eric Carle. And for a fantastic Scottish example, I want to shout out to one of my absolute favorite writers in this scene, Rachel Plummer. Her highly acclaimed collection with Emma Press, Wayne, features LGBT reimaginings of Scottish folklore written explicitly for teens. It is a beautiful collection, an incredibly important collection, and also gorgeously illustrated, so I highly encourage you to check it out. I put a link to order the book in the description below. And whether you consider it to be for the young or simply the young at heart, my absolute favorite monster poem of all time will always be Edwin Morgan's The Loch Ness Monster's Song. Snowfall? As I hope I've shown in this episode, there are so many approaches that you can take to writing poetry from the perspective of monsters, from the horrifying to the humorous, the fearsome to the funny. Have a play around, get experimental, and get a little spooky. Have fun, guys. That is all of my monster tips for today. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video and that you got some useful advice out of it that you can perhaps use for writing your own poetry. And stay tuned. Next Friday, I will be checking in with Kevin McLean to see how he is getting on with the Monster Challenge. And then on Sunday, the 4th of July, we will be releasing the full happy hour episode on this challenge. Monsters for America! Remember that to support our work and to be able to submit your own challenges for us to write on, you can sign up to our Patreon for as little as £1 a month. We are also running a project at the moment where the money from our Patreon goes to support making this YouTube channel more accessible. So all of your support really does mean the world and make an impact. As always, please do like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell icon. Thank you guys so much, and happy writing.